The truth is compelling, beauty is compelling, and goodness is compelling. And when we teach people why tradition is so beautiful and true, that can very often win them over, especially when we do that gently and honestly. There's a reason why we have sung Gregorian chant in our church for the last 1,500 years. There's a reason for that, and there's a reason why the church has actually asked us to do that. That comes from the Second Vatican Council. So the church herself is guiding us in this. What was the problem with Cain's sacrifice in that story of Cain and Abel? Abel gave God the best. Cain withheld the best from God, and God was not pleased with his sacrifice. Sacred liturgy, it is our sacrifice, and we should be lavish with that. We should not withhold anything from God, and we give God what is best. Practicality has no place in that, because that's the wrong standard by which to judge the worship of God. There's nothing that's too extravagant in the worship of God.
I recently had the privilege of visiting the Norbertines of St. Michael's Abbey. They're a beautiful monastery run by some incredible priests who have a deep appreciation and focus on the Mass and the Liturgy of the Hours. I sat down with Father Ambrose and Father Edmund to talk about the Mass, church architecture, and sacred music. Enjoy our conversation. Why is beauty so important for this day and age?
There's so much ugliness around us in life, that goes all the way back to the fall. Sin is ugly, and the world is confusing, and we're surrounded by now a post-Christian world that doesn't necessarily elevate the transcendentals like truth and goodness and beauty, which is what you asked about. So the church, in her evangelical zeal, can show back to the fallen world the face of God by showing the beauty of the sacred liturgy in every aspect of it, for the purpose of this conversation, in music, but also investments in church construction. There are great stories about whether or not in times of persecution the church should sell off the church plate and the gold and the silver and some people through history have complained, well, the church is so rich in her,
right.
She has too much beauty, too many valuable and beautiful things. And the answer to that has always been that belongs not just to the church, that is to the priests or to the bishops, but that belongs to the poor. A poor person can walk into a Catholic church and find the most beautiful things, and they belong to him or her too. That chalice and that beautiful stained glass window and that beautiful chasuble and that amazing organ and the rich singing of the sacred liturgy, the Gregorian chant, it belongs to everybody, including the poor. So beauty in sacred liturgy is the great equalizer. Everybody can enjoy it and participate in it, and everybody can find a path to God through it.
So we're in the process of constructing a neo-Gothic church following the models of the first churches in Korea. What we're trying to do right now is pretty bold, but it's very challenging. People say that we don't need to build this traditional church structure because of the cost. And an organ is nice if it's affordable. And so there's always this leaning back to what's practical. What do you think we can say to them in terms of doing something bigger for God?
First of all, congratulations on being able to construct a new church for your community. That's such a great gift. A gift not only for your community, but also for the whole church. That's a new church is a beautiful thing. So, and the fact that it's a neo-Gothic church, that already says that you know what you're doing. So, that's great that you have a plan in mind, a design in mind, kind of the ethos that you're hoping to construct around in mind. That's wonderful. What was the problem with Cain's sacrifice in that story of Cain and Abel? Abel gave to God what was best, what was most precious, what was an extravagance. Cain withheld the best from God, and God was not pleased with his sacrifice. Sacred liturgy is the right worship of God. It is the sacrifice of praise. It's the sacrifice of Calvary. It is our sacrifice, and we give God what is best. It's our sacrifice to God in this perfect praise and perfect prayer, which is the sacred liturgy, in a church with the music, with the organ, with the precious vessels and the beautiful vestments. This is our best, and we should be lavish with that. We should not withhold anything from God. Practicality has no place in that, because that's the wrong standard by which to judge the worship of God. So classically, in the sacred liturgy, we burn candles made with beeswax. That's a very precious thing. And we watch them be consumed as they melt. We burn that candle up in praise of God. We cut flowers. We don't have living plants in a church. We cut the flowers and we give them to God, and we watch them die. They're taken up in that sacrifice. We take incense and we burn it, and it's gone. What we give to God is burned up like a holocaust of praise for him. And it's what's most precious and best. There's nothing that's too extravagant in the worship of God.
In our program for designing a new church, when we are trying to put attention on sacred music, what would you say in terms of putting that emphasis on good sacred music?
Well, tradition is the democracy that includes the dead. If we think too much about the present moment and the fads of the present moment, we are neglecting those who have gone before us. I don't know a lot about Asian culture, but the little bit I do know tells me that ancestors are important. The generations who come before us are very, very important. In Catholic life, and especially in Catholic liturgical life, the way that we most honor our ancestors is in preserving the traditions that they hand down to us. And if we're overly focused on the fads of today, either in the way we build a church, or the way we sing songs, or the way that we just even think about Catholic life, we are neglecting all of those centuries of the Christians who have handed down the faith to us. And so the church has been very, very clear in all of her documents about sacred music that there is one kind of music that is to be preferred over all others, and that's Gregorian chant.
Why does the church hold Gregorian chant as the primacy of sacred music?
Well, primarily because it's the most ancient form of sacred music. So it takes its origins perhaps even from some of the Jewish chants. They're called Gregorian chants because Pope St. Gregory the Great, he was the one, it's believed, who either composed many of the chants himself. There are some very beautiful icons of Gregory sitting there writing out the chant, and the Holy Spirit is whispering into his ear. So there's this kind of sense of that the chant is sacred because it's maybe inspired directly by the Holy Spirit. Gregory at least was a redactor and codifier of the liturgical year. So he was taking all these different chants and sort of saying, this one should be used for Advent, this one should be used for this, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that it goes all the way back to Pope St. Gregory the Great, the Pope of the early church, that's, I'd say, the main reason why it's sort of the original sacred music. But then you could also talk about the aesthetic quality. People just instinctively, even if they hear it, in a video game or a movie or something, they kind of know that this is unlike any other kind of music. And therefore it allows us to enter more deeply into God because it takes us out of this world. It also has the amazing ability to evoke very strong emotions without the kind of visceral, sentimental experience which you might get from modern pop music. So there's a lot of really beautiful, in fact, I was just at a concert, a Christian concert, very beautiful artist. She wrote some very beautiful reflections on the resurrection, and it moved me. But it moved me immediately on a sort of emotional level. Chant has the ability to kind of move you somewhat on an emotional level, but mostly on an intellectual and a spiritual level. So it doesn't rile you up necessarily or get you all worked up and just focus then on the emotions. It starts with that, but it very quickly brings you to a higher place. And that's what prayer really is about, bringing us into God.
That's very intriguing, because when people talk about beauty and how beauty lifts us up, there's many times beauty having to awaken our emotions. What would you say sacred music should be doing in terms of, as you just shared, moving our soul into that deeper prayer, lifting it up versus the emotions. Because today, when we talk about active participation, it seems like it needs to awaken our emotions.
Right. That's a very good question. And I think it's important to remember that all of the liturgy and the aspects of it, the vestments, the art, the music, these things are handmaids to the liturgy itself, to the text, to the actual sacrament that's occurring. So it's possible to go to extremes. It's possible to have music which focuses too much on the emotions and it's more about what do I get out of it, right? I'll never forget a priest explaining to me the Mass. He said, the Mass isn't about you. It's about God. That shocks us, I think, because we're like, what are you talking about, Father? I'm supposed to get something out of this. I have to actively participate, etc. That's all true, but primarily it's an act of worship. It's okay if, for instance, you don't understand everything that's being played on the organ, you don't understand everything that's being sung by the choir, this Gregorian chant in this strange language with these strange sounds. That experience in itself can remind us that we are here to give proper worship to God. Now, having said that, active participation, the Second Vatican Council does call for active participation, and it is important that our faithful be able, certainly, to understand the readings and to respond when it is their time. But that doesn't mean that everyone has an active role on the altar, for instance. If you think about it, that would be absurd. So it can't mean that kind of doing something physically. That can't be what active participation actually means.
Full and active participation, participatio actuosa is what it says in Latin in the conciliar document about this, is first and foremost a unity of our heart and mind with the action of the liturgy. We are prayerfully uniting ourselves with what is happening liturgically. That is, we are praying the sacred liturgy. That's what it means to participate fully. And I think when people finally can understand that, then the externals about, let's say, praise and worship style music from 50 years ago doesn't necessarily follow, that we don't have to have that kind of music necessarily to understand that we are participating fully. So traditional worship tends to be more quiet and contemplative. Gregorian chant is not raucous. It takes a certain serenity and interior peace and prayer. It's a vehicle for that internal participation with the sacred liturgy. And helping people to understand what it means to participate can show someone that they can be a very charismatic participant in the sacred liturgy without saying anything at all, or singing anything at all even. Not that saying anything or singing anything is bad, not at all. But charismatic participation can also be something quiet and contemplative and interior, and the Church has always taught that. In the context of the sacred liturgy, we are not in this world. The liturgy is our opportunity to go through the veil and to participate in something that is eternal, the heavenly liturgy, which is what the sacred liturgy and the traditions that bring it to us show us and teach us. It's not this world. We're plugging into another world. And it's really important, not only for young people, but for old people too, when they walk into a church and participate in the sacred liturgy, they are experiencing an identity which is not an identity that's given to them by this world. Classically, in a Catholic church, the windows are either opaque or stained glass so that we can't even see the world outside. It is a different world. The priest dresses differently than when he's outside of the church. The music is not at all like the music of this world outside of the church. It doesn't smell the same. It doesn't look the same. It doesn't sound the same. Because our Catholic identity is not something that is given to us here below from the fads of this world. It's something that's given to us by our faith. And that is constant and unchanging. And it's the same identity that our Catholic ancestors had 100 years ago and 500 years ago and 1500 years ago. And we learn that, children learn that when they walk into a traditional Catholic church.
So how would you go about for someone who is intrigued by what they experience in the Mass, desiring to learn more, want to steep themselves into more of the church's tradition, where would they go?
A good Google search will get people pretty far right now. I mean, the internet is, the whole world is at our fingertips, right? So if they're interested in Gregorian chant, for example, like traditional music in church, which is the Gregorian chant tradition of our church, they can find everything they want to know about that. And I would say that hopefully having recourse to a good and holy and faithful priest like yourself, Father, maybe they'll ask you and you can help guide them in that too. People need a lot of things. First of all, they need a resetting in the way they think about what it means to be Catholic, that they need to be encouraged by your preaching, by your beautiful worship in the church that you're going to build. They need to be instructed that our Catholic identity is not at all like the identity that we live as citizens of this world. That's a first kind of sea change that people have to make. And then I think people need to be guided into into a serious catechesis that we have not passed on for about 2 generations now. What are the basic tenets of our faith? What does it mean to be Catholic? And what is a full Catholic identity? What does that look like? What does it mean? So they need that. But then the whole culture that goes along with that we've been speaking about so far, the music and the church architecture and the organ and everything else liturgical, that fits into that bigger picture of a full Catholic identity when those other pieces fall into place.
I'm experiencing different movements in the contemporary church. I think there are some who are more of the charismatic movement and are drawn to how the Holy Spirit speaks in that sense. And then there are others that are drawn more to the sacred tradition. And I would say there are a lot of young, newly ordained priests who are continuing to move in this direction. What would you say to those priests and how they may want to move forward?
The generation gap is real. It's a good question, Father. And there's always been a generation gap. So you might imagine 60 years ago, the generation gap looked like some very, what we might call rigid, old-fashioned priests who were governing and guiding the church. And the young priests and the young people in the church were part of the Cultural Revolution and wanting something much more, you said charismatic, but something much more outside the box and kind of innovative and with the times and with the spirit of the world blowing in, along with the hippies and everybody else and the bell bottoms and everything else. So, and that was a real generation gap. We see exactly the opposite now. That crowd has grown up. They are running the church now and often running parishes and financially supporting parishes, and they still think like the Cultural Revolution of the 60s, while the young people are looking for something more institutionally stable, something more traditional, something that reaches back into the roots of our faith more deeply. So it's the same generation gap, but just inversed, upside down. So I think that a priest who's trying to guide his parish in these conversations might, first of all, remind that older generation, well, you were a young person once too. You remember what it felt like to feel like the people on top and in charge weren't listening to you? Maybe it would be a good opportunity for you to give some open ears to the young people and the young priests who are now in your shoes from 60 years ago. That would be one way. But then also, more importantly, the truth is compelling. Beauty is compelling, and goodness is compelling. And when we teach people why tradition is so beautiful and true, that can very often win them over, especially when we do that gently and honestly. That when we show people, there's a reason why we have sung Gregorian chant in our church for the last 1,500 years. There's a reason for that, and there's a reason why the church has actually asked us to do that. And I think also when we show people where the church teaches what she teaches clearly, and the documents of the Second Vatican Council could be a good place to start with that older generation, because those documents on the liturgy tell us that we should be using Latin and Greek, that the people in the parish should be able to sing the responses in Gregorian chant in Latin and in Greek. And that comes from the Second Vatican Council. So the church herself is guiding us in this, and we can help that older generation to see that, rather than just to, I'll try to say this gently, but let them have their way without any good reason. Mm-hmm. The good reason is the truth and the beauty that will compel them because they've compelled us, right?
When trying to revive tradition in the sacred liturgy, there are many different facets to the liturgy that we can give our first attention. And so in the hierarchy of things, we're dealing with sacred music, sacred vestments, sacred vessels, the ritual itself, the language. How would you go about prioritizing sacred music in the scheme of things?
Great. I think the fact that you have the opportunity to build a new church is a great thing. And because the church building itself is probably the first impression that people have when they walk into the church before the liturgy even begins. So the traditional construction of a traditionally ordered church would be the first place to begin. And you have that opportunity in your parish. Thanks be to God, in your community. Music is a little bit like that. It's the atmospheric impression of the sacred liturgy that someone will experience without even realizing they're experiencing it. So I think music would be shortly behind the architectural environment. The musical environment is a close second to that, probably, if not just in tandem with that. I would argue that there are other things that could be as important too. The direction the priest is facing, that is
Sure.
very, very important.
Sure.
Language is important insofar as we need to understand ourselves to be Latin Rite Catholics, and that whether I go to Mass in Spanish or in Korean or Polish or Italian or French, that I still need to understand myself to be a Latin Rite Catholic. So the Latin language interlaced, if not used wholesale in the liturgy, is really, really important.
What is your hope for the future of the church when it comes to these movements that are surfacing and the universal church?
Yes. I hope that 100 years from now, you or I, well, we won't be around 100 years from now, but I hope that a Catholic can walk into a church, maybe your church, the one that you're building, or our Abbey church here at St. Michael's Abbey, or a church anywhere in the Catholic world, and they'll hear the Gregorian chant that we are singing hopefully today in our churches, and they will hear hopefully some of the wonderful polyphonic music that comes from Western Europe, which is a great gift to the whole Catholic world, even outside of Western Europe. The real monuments, musical monuments of our Holy Catholic faith that came with the way that our faith grew out of Europe and into the whole world. That's not an accident. Christ became incarnate in a particular place amongst a particular race of people at a particular moment in time. That is in Bethlehem, in Judea, when that happened. And that's part of God's wisdom. And then that spread through Greece and Western Europe and the Near East and Northern Africa. And that created culture for people and replaced paganism in the whole world. And I think that it would be beautiful if that story continued to be told 100 years from now and 200 years from now and 300 years from now, precisely because that cultural tradition is moving with the church through time, and we are the ones who are responsible to keep it and to pass it on. That's our job, Father, and it's the job of the faithful in your community as well. It's not about us. It's about this legacy and heritage, and it's about our holy faith that we have to pass along to the future unadulterated, and that includes the cultural monuments like music.